Now, you are sending your ships, your people, into a potentially dangerous area. You've decided you are no longer going to be doing that. How difficult was that decision? How are you monitoring what is happening here? How long do you think this is potentially going to last?
Yeah, it's a good question, or a couple of good questions. I mean, in the end, we've tried to put shift through as long as we could. I think we had to make our first assessment middle of last week. Then we decided, in essence, to continue. But as one of our ships also got attacked last week, Friday, we then decided to pause passages through the Red Sea. Since then, we've seen more attacks. And as a consequence of that, we then decided also yesterday to now reroute our ships, at least for the time being, because if we wait, that will not make it any better. And then it's probably better for most of the ships to accept that we will have a week or 10 days delay, rather than wait for much longer when it will potentially just get worse.
Rolf, in your meetings that you're having right now, how long are you guys mapping out that this could last for?
Very difficult to say. I think, we think that it's not going to be solved tomorrow. Yeah, but I do think that it could be anything between hopefully days or weeks. But of course, there are also scenarios thinkable where it takes longer.
Rolf, we just heard from Lloyd Austin in that string that we just brought our audience, the US Defense Secretary, talking about the response that the military is going to be making here. We are going to see an increased military presence. There is some talk potentially about convoys going through the region as well. Presumably that would just slow down shipping as well. How big an impact do you think the effort that the authorities are making at the moment is going to have?
Well, first of all, let me say that I'm really happy to see that people are starting to step up, because I think it's in everybody's interest that we indeed see the ships back through the Suez. I also agree with you that it's not likely that we're going to be able to solve everything very soon. And as such, there's also a scenario thinkable where some ships can go through Suez and some will have to sail around the Cape for a little bit longer. But that would actually be a scenario that I think would be manageable for everyone.
Rolf, what do you look at to measure that your vessels will be safe? So to say, okay, let's restart some, not others. What's your criteria for that?
I mean, in the end, that's very difficult to determine, and we've had tons of discussions on that topic over the last 48, 72 hours. I think in the end, what's very clear is that the situation as we see it today, and as we have seen it over the last week or so, with multiple attacks almost on a daily basis, that is certainly not safe enough. In the end, it will probably not be 5 criteria that will need to be met, but it will have to be a little bit of a judgment call at some point in time. But right now, for sure, the situation is too unsafe to expose any of our people to that.
Rolf, how inflationary do you think this is all going to be? Over the last few years, we've learned that supply chains can get very snarled very quickly and have a very big impact. Do you think that's what we're looking at here, a repeat of some of what we saw during the pandemic and after the pandemic? Does this have the potential to have a similar effect?
I hope not. Yeah, I think, we've all experienced that period, and I think it's been very unusual, and we certainly don't need another one of those. I would at the moment still like to think that this is not going to last for very long, and that may then still mean that there is going to be a bit of a spike in freight rates, but hopefully not for a very long period of time. Having said that, we see also, since these incidents started, that the number of requests that we get and the number of bookings that we get has gone up tremendously. So, of course, this is how markets react, and it will all depend on how long this is going to take.
Can you just walk me through kind of how it works when you have to reroute? Like how much things cost, like how you pass through. I'm assuming you pass through that cost to your end user, and then they kick it back to you. Like, how does that all transpire?
Well, in essence, if you send a ship to Europe, for example, from Asia, if you send it around Africa, that probably costs you about $1 million, maybe a little bit more extra, compared to when you go through Suez. And it also means that it takes about 7 to 10 days longer before the ships arrive in Europe. So that's, I think, in essence, the effect of it. That does not have an effect on the cargo that has already been booked. What you, however, see is that because there is so much uncertainty in the market, lots of people now try to move their cargo quicker. And that then creates a bottleneck, especially at origin. And that, of course, then drives up prices because people are willing to pay more to get on board on the first departing vessel.
Rolf, how does what is happening in the Red Sea interact with what is happening with the Panama Canal, where we're also seeing bottlenecks? You've got two of the biggest, I don't think we've ever seen this before, where these two critical canals both have problems at the same time.
That is definitely a problem that doesn't make it any better. We see that the number of canal passages in Panama is limited. Because of that, we have to route more ships through the Suez. And of course, if we can't use Suez at this point in time, then it's a bit of a double whammy. I think the Panama Canal, I just heard a little bit more encouraging news there over the last 24, 48 hours, which is that whereas they initially said that they were going to reduce the number of transits even more, now there's at least talk of whether that they may not have to do that. That would give a little bit of relief, but of course, in the overall scheme of things, that's not enough, to get back to normal.
Which makes me wonder, Rolf, whether it's geopolitical, whether it's environmental, like drought, etc. Are these just things you have to live with now that are more dramatic and maybe longer term than you would have, say, 10 years ago?
To some extent, the answer to that is probably yes. Although if you look back in history, there have, of course, also been other times where certain things could not be done and certain markets could not be served. But if you look at the last 4 or 5 years, there's, of course, been more extreme cases than we have seen for a very long time.
How much capacity gets taken out by this, Rolf? I'm wondering. We've seen, obviously, freight rates come down very sharply, and I'm wondering whether or not this just absorbs the kind of extra capacity that is in the market, and as a result of which we don't see freight rates spiking too far, i.e. this absorbs the extra capacity and the market finds a higher but more stable level. How much volatility do you think we're going to see in freight rates? How much volatility do you think we're going to see in prices around all of this?
I mean, we saw, if you look back at the last 4 to 6 weeks, we did not have that much overcapacity because idle fleet was low and everybody was actually pretty well utilized. You also saw short-term rates coming up a little bit over the last 4 to 6 weeks. I think that will accelerate. It normally would anyway because we are going up to Chinese New Year. So I do think that there is going to be a shortage of space over the next period up to Chinese New Year. Hopefully, it will be a short-term spike and things will get somewhat back to normal after that, because then normally we would enter into a slack season, which means that the balance between supply and demand is normally a little bit more relaxed. But of course, a lot of these things are unfortunately very uncertain at this point in time.